The Revolution. The Loyalists. Not all Americans supported the Revolution. Approximately every 1 in 5 colonists were in favor of British rule. These colonists were known as Loyalists. American patriots abused the Loyalists by burning down their homes, and some were murdered. The Loyalists arrive in Canada. When the Revolution ended and the Treaty of Paris was signed, between 80,000 and 100,000 Loyalists were forced to leave their homes in the United States. Some people went back to Britain or went to other colonies like Canada. Britain offered farmland in Quebec, Nova Scotia, and PEI. In 1783, 7,500 Loyalists settled in what was going to become Ontario. 2,000 settled in Quebec and almost 30,000 in Cape Breton, PEI, and the St. John River Valley. The Black Loyalists. During the American Revolution, there were approximately 500,000 African Americans in the 13 colonies. Most of them were slaves. Britain offered freedom to slaves so that the plantation economy in the American states would be ruined. Tens of thousands of slaves crossed into Britain to become soldiers, cooks, and laborers. Unfortunately, some slaves were sold back into slavery when the war was over. The First Nations. When the American Revolution began, the First Nations felt they needed to choose sides so that their religion and interests would be protected. It was unlikely that they would stay out of conflict. The Mohawks had strong links with the British, but the Haudenosaunee Confederacy decided to stay neutral. Joseph Brant disagreed. Joseph Brant. Joseph Brant visited England as an ambassador in 1775 to secure the promise of lands in Quebec. When the British lost the war in 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed and recognized American independence and divided North America. The First Nations were forgotten in the treaty and they were feeling betrayed. The Haudenosaunee had been supporters of the British cause for many years, which Brant stated in a letter to the Grand Council. The British government realized that they owed the First Nations, so they were given land along the Grand River in southern Ontario. The Mohawks settled there in 1784. The Mohawks would also help the British in the War of 1812. The remaining British colonies. After 1783, the British made serious efforts to build up their English-speaking colonies. The Loyalists, First Nations, and African Americans had been the first people welcomed to the North. Being that they were refugees from the United States, they were thought to be less likely to challenge the authority of the British government. The War of 1812 guaranteed that British North America would not be a part of the United States. Few people were certain of the outcome of the war because British North America was so separated. The French speakers did not believe in British rule, the colonies had small populations, and the people in the East Coast had little in common with the inland colonies. It was difficult to unite these three diverse colonies. The Constitutional Act. The British government had problems with the Loyalists. They created problems for the government which was wasting their time. People who settled in Quebec demanded to be governed separately from the French speakers. The Constitution Act, passed in 1791, divided Quebec into two new colonies, which were Upper and Lower Canada. Lower Canada kept French law and culture, while Upper Canada was English-speaking and had British law and culture. Later on, Lower Canada became Quebec, and Upper Canada became Ontario. Both colonies were given their own governments. The executive and legislative councils were appointed by the governor, which was always a British nobleman. The members of these councils were prominent members of the community, and they helped the governor make laws. Assembly members could also propose acts or laws, but could be turned down by the governor.